Have you ever noticed that someone who used to be everywhere suddenly became almost invisible? Not through any dramatic event, not through scandal or catastrophe or the obvious machinery of social exclusion, simply through a quieter, more gradual process of withdrawal that happened so slowly and so completely that by the time you noticed the absence, you could not quite identify the moment when the presence had stopped. Someone who used to participate in every conversation, who used to share every opinion, who used to be reliably, predictably, continuously present in the digital and social landscape that constitutes the primary fabric of contemporary public life, who began at some point that resisted precise identification to participate less, to share less, to be present less, to perform the continuous exhibition of self that the modern social environment has normalized as the default mode of human existence, less and less, until the performance stopped entirely, and what remained was a silence that most of the people who had been audience to the performance noticed, if they noticed it at all, only as an absence where a familiar signal had been. If you have witnessed this process in someone you know, you have witnessed something that Yuval Noah Harari regards as one of the most significant and most under-examined social phenomena of the present moment. Not withdrawal in the ordinary sense of depression or burnout, or the ordinary social contractions that life's difficulties regularly produce in ordinary people navigating ordinary difficulties, something more specific and more deliberate, and in its implications considerably more consequential than any of those ordinary explanations suggest. The silent disappearance of the people who have woken up from the system, the people who have arrived, through whatever combination of experience and reflection and the particular quality of attention that genuine waking up requires, at a sufficiently clear perception of the actual mechanics of the social and technological and economic system within which they are embedded, that continued participation in that system, on the terms the system requires, has become something they are no longer willing or able to perform. These people are not failing, they are not losing, they are not retreating in defeat from a world that has defeated them. They are doing something considerably more interesting and considerably more deliberate than any of those descriptions suggest. They are making a choice. The specific, costly, countercultural choice of withdrawal from the system's demand for their continuous participation, their continuous attention, their continuous performance of the self that the system requires them to perform in the direction of something that most of the people still inside the performance can barely perceive as an option, let alone as something worth the cost that the choosing of it entails. They are choosing genuine life over the performance of life, genuine thought over the performance of thought, genuine presence to their own experience over the continuous exhibition of experience that the platforms and the social environments of the contemporary world have constructed as the primary arena within which human life is supposed to be visibly occurring. Harari's warning is not that these people are making a mistake. His warning is considerably more unsettling than that. His warning is that the system they are disappearing from is specifically designed to make their disappearance invisible, to render their withdrawal incoherent, and to ensure that the insight that drove the withdrawal remains unavailable to the people who remain inside the performance. Precisely because the availability of that insight to the general population would be among the most dangerous possible threats to the continued functioning of a system whose operation depends at the most fundamental level on the continuous, unreflective, unexamined participation of the people it is extracting value from. To understand what Harari means requires understanding what the system is, not in the conspiratorial sense, not in the sense of a deliberate plan constructed by identifiable villains in identifiable rooms with identifiable intentions, in the structural sense, in the sense that a system is a set of mutually reinforcing dynamics, incentive structures, technological architectures, and social norms that together produce specific outcomes regardless of whether any individual participant in the system intends those outcomes or even understands them. The system Harari is describing is the system of the attention economy, embedded within the broader system of digital capitalism, embedded within the broader system of the particular form of modernity that the convergence of specific technologies and specific economic arrangements has produced in the first quarter of the 21st century. This system has specific requirements of the people who participate in it. Not requirements in the sense of explicit demands, not requirements backed by the visible threat of punishment for non-compliance. requirements in the structural sense of the conditions that the system needs its participants to meet in order to continue functioning at the level of productivity and profitability that it is designed to produce. The most fundamental of these requirements is continuous attention. The system requires that its participants give it their attention, continuously, reliably, and in the specific forms: emotional, reactive, comparison-driven, novelty-seeking, that the system's architecture is calibrated to generate and to sustain. Without this continuous attention, the system cannot produce the engagement metrics that justify its advertising revenue, cannot produce the behavioral data that feeds the machine learning systems that make its recommendations more accurate, cannot produce the social dynamics of comparison and competition and mutual performance that generate the desire for the products and the experiences that the economic system surrounding the attention economy is designed to sell. The second requirement is continuous self-disclosure. The system requires that its participants continuously generate data about themselves, about their preferences, their opinions, their emotional states, their social relationships, their physical locations, their purchasing behaviors, their fears, their desires, their vulnerabilities. Not through overt interrogation, not through the instruments of surveillance that previous authoritarian systems employed, through the voluntary, incentivized, socially normalized disclosure that the design of the platforms has made the default mode of participation. The person who shares their thoughts, documents their experiences, records their emotions, and performs their daily life for the audience of the platform is not being coerced. They are exercising the specific form of agency that the system has made available to them, but the exercise of that agency is simultaneously the production of the raw material that the system requires for its operation. The third requirement is the most important and the most rarely examined. The system requires continuous identification with the version of oneself that the system has helped to construct. The curated self, the performed self. The self whose value is determined by the metrics of visibility and engagement that the platform provides as the primary feedback mechanism for the question of whether one's existence is mattering in the ways that the system has defined mattering. The self that is perpetually engaged in the project of demonstrating to the audience that the platform has assembled that it is the specific kind of person that the self-narrative it has been developing and presenting across years and possibly decades of continuous digital self-performance claims to be. This identification with the performed self is the system's deepest and most consequential requirement, because it is the one that makes all the other requirements feel natural rather than imposed. The person who identifies with their performed self participates continuously in the performance not because they are being forced to, but because the performance feels like the expression of their genuine identity. The continuous attention they give to the system feels like engagement with their own life. The continuous self-disclosure feels like authentic self-expression. The continuous comparison and competition feel like the ordinary social dynamics of a human being navigating a social world. From the inside of this identification, the system does not feel like a system at all. It feels like reality, and the person who withdraws from it does not feel like someone making a sophisticated choice about their relationship to an extractive technological architecture. They feel like someone failing to be real. This is what Harari identifies as the most powerful mechanism of the system's self-perpetuation. Not the obvious addictive properties of the platforms, though those are real and their effects are well documented. Not the economic pressures that make digital participation practically necessary for an increasing range of professional and social functions, though those pressures are also real and increasingly significant. The deepest mechanism of self-perpetuation is the identification, the capture of identity itself by the performed version of identity that the system has helped to construct, such that withdrawal from the performance feels not like a liberation, but like a dissolution, like losing the self rather than recovering it, like disappearing rather than becoming more genuinely present. The people who wake up from the system are the people who have arrived at sufficient distance from this identification to perceive it clearly. who have developed through whatever combination of personal crisis, philosophical encounter, contemplative practice, or the specific quality of attention that genuine life experience sometimes produces in people willing to pay it, the capacity to see the identification for what it is, not their genuine self, not the authentic expression of their actual values and their actual experience and their actual relationship with the actual world they actually inhabit. A construction, a performance, a specific version of themselves generated in response to the specific incentive architecture of a system that required for its continued functioning the generation and the maintenance of exactly this kind of performance. The moment of this perception, when it genuinely arrives, is not comfortable. It is, in fact, one of the most disorienting experiences available to a human being in the contemporary world, precisely because the identification being perceived and the identification perceiving it are, at the moment of the perception, the same entity. The performed self becoming aware that it is performed. The curated identity catching a glimpse of the curation. The person who has been living inside the system's definition of who they are suddenly, and for the first time experiencing the distance between that definition and the reality of their own actual experience, their own actual values, their own actual sense of what genuinely matters. That the performance has been organized continuously and systematically to prevent them from attending to. What happens in the aftermath of this perception varies enormously across different people in different circumstances, with different levels of economic dependency on the system and different levels of social identity investment in the performance. But across the full range of variation in how the aftermath unfolds, there is a consistent pattern in the direction of movement. The pattern of progressive withdrawal. Of the gradual, sometimes sudden, always in some sense irreversible pulling back from the system's demand for continuous participation in ways that are, from the outside, often interpreted as depression, burnout, social failure, or the loss of relevance that the digital economy imposes on those who fail to keep up with the pace of its evolution. From the inside, the experience is typically the reverse of all of these interpretations. It feels, for the person who is doing it, not like loss, but like recovery. Not like disappearance, but like return. Not like the dissolution of the self, but like the first genuine encounter with the self that the performance had been substituting for. Harari has described this pattern across multiple contexts and with reference to multiple forms of what he calls awakening from the stories that organized experience prior to the awakening. His most consistent and most personally grounded account of the experience is his account of his own sustained practice of meditation, and what the specific quality of attention that sustained meditation develops made visible to him about the nature of the stories and the performances and the identifications that organized his own experience before the quality of attention that meditation develops was sufficiently developed to perceive them clearly. What becomes visible when that quality of attention is developed is not something hidden. It is something that was always there, always operating, always producing its effects on the quality and the character of experience. But it was visible only from the specific vantage point that genuine distance from identification with it provides. The machinery of self-construction. The continuous, automatic, largely unconscious process through which the mind generates and maintains and defends the story of who it is. Not as a deliberate project, as the default activity of a consciousness that has been shaped by evolution and by culture and by the specific social and technological environment of the present moment, to spend the vast majority of its energy on the project of being a particular kind of person rather than on the project of actually being present to the experience of being a person of any kind. The person who wakes up to this machinery does not necessarily know, at the moment of waking, what to do with the perception. They know what they are no longer willing to do. They are no longer willing to participate in the performance with the unreflective commitment that participation at full efficiency requires. They are no longer willing to give their continuous, unreserved, uncritical attention to the system's demands for engagement. They are no longer willing to generate the emotional reactions, share the opinions, perform the social identities, and maintain the curated self-presentations that the system requires for its continued functioning, and that their own continued visibility within the system requires of them. But what they are willing to do instead, what they actually want, what a life genuinely organized around their actual values and their actual experience and their actual sense of what matters would actually look like, is not always immediately clear at the moment of waking. The withdrawal often precedes the construction of the alternative. The silence often comes before the understanding of what the silence is for. The disappearance from the system's visibility often happens before the appearance, to the person doing the disappearing, of what they are disappearing toward. This is the phase that Harari identifies as the most vulnerable and the most critical phase of the waking up process. The phase of the withdrawal without the destination. The phase of having perceived the inadequacy of the system's account of what a human life is for without having yet fully developed the alternative account that the perception calls for. The phase of being, in the most literal sense, between stories. The old story, the story of the system, the story of visibility and engagement, and the continuous performance of the curated self, no longer holds sufficient conviction to organize behavior. The new story, the story of what a life genuinely organized around genuine values and genuine presence to genuine experience would consist of, has not yet been sufficiently developed to replace the organizational function that the old story provided. This between stories phase is the phase during which the silent disappearance is most visible to the people who are watching from inside the system. The sudden or gradual reduction in posting frequency, the withdrawal from the social events and the professional networking and the continuous availability that the system's social norms require, the apparent loss of interest in the projects and the pursuits and the forms of self-improvement that were, within the frame of the system's values, clearly worth pursuing. From inside the system, these changes look like symptoms, like something going wrong with the person who is undergoing them, like failure or depression or the specific form of dropping out that the system interprets as the inability to keep up rather than as the choice to step back. From outside the system, from the vantage point of sufficient distance from the identification that had been organizing experience within it, these changes look like something entirely different. Like the first stages of recovery from a specific kind of intoxication. Like the early, disorienting, not yet fully articulate return to something that was there before the intoxication began. Like the first genuine encounter with the silence that the system's noise had been displacing, a silence that is, once encountered, recognized as the necessary condition for the specific quality of thought and the specific quality of presence to one's own experience that the noise had been preventing. The content of what becomes possible in this silence is the fourth and most important dimension of what Harari's warning is pointing toward. Because the warning is not simply a description of the social phenomenon of withdrawal, it is a description of what the withdrawal makes possible, and why the possibility it makes available is precisely the possibility that the system has the greatest interest in preventing from becoming widely available. What becomes possible in the silence is genuine thought, not the processing of information which the system provides in quantities and at speeds that the human cognitive system was not designed to handle and does not process accurately at the pace the system delivers it. Not the formation of opinions, which the system produces efficiently and continuously by managing the informational inputs that opinions form in response to. Not the construction of positions and the performance of engagement with the positions of others, which the system rewards with the metrics of visibility and social approval that make position-taking and engagement performing the dominant form of what passes for thinking within the system's architecture. Genuine thought. The slow, non-linear, often uncomfortable, always somewhat surprising process through which a mind actually engages with the genuine complexity of genuine questions, follows the evidence wherever it actually leads, rather than wherever the system's incentive architecture rewards following it, and arrives at understandings that are genuinely its own, rather than the predictable outputs of the informational environment that the system has been calibrating specifically and continuously to produce predictable outputs from. Genuine thought requires exactly what the system most consistently prevents. Time. Not the time of the endless scroll, which is time in the quantity of hours spent, but not time in the quality of the sustained, uninterrupted, genuinely exploratory engagement with difficulty that genuine thought requires. Silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of the specific kind of constant informational and social input that continuously redirects attention from the interior of one's own engagement with genuine questions to the exterior of the system's agenda for what attention should be engaged with, and the specific willingness to be uncertain, to not know, to remain in the discomfort of genuine not knowing long enough for genuine understanding to form, that the system's architecture of continuous opinion formation and continuous position-taking and continuous engagement metrics systematically prevents, because uncertainty is the enemy of engagement and genuine not knowing produces no content that the system can distribute. The people who wake up from the system and undergo the silent disappearance are, in the phase of their withdrawal, recovering the conditions within which genuine thought becomes possible. And the thoughts that become possible in those conditions are consistently and predictably thoughts that the system would prefer not to be thought. Not because the system is conscious of preferences, but because the system's architecture is such that the thoughts it produces most efficiently and most abundantly are the thoughts that serve its continued functioning. And the thoughts that genuine reflection on the system's actual nature and actual effects tends to produce are the thoughts that, if sufficiently widely distributed, would constitute the most serious possible threat to that continued functioning. The most important of these thoughts, the thought that the silent disappearance is most consistently associated with and most consistently preceded by, is a simple one. The recognition that the performance is not the life. That the curated self is not the actual self, that the engagement metrics are not measures of genuine human value, that the system's account of what a human life is for, the account in which life is most genuinely lived, when it is most thoroughly performed for the largest possible audience, in the formats that generate the most engagement and the most visibility and the most continuous social validation, is not the correct account. That the correct account of what a human life is for is something that the system is specifically organized to prevent its participants from developing, because the development of that account is incompatible with the level of unreflective, continuous participation that the system requires to function at the level of productivity it is designed to produce. This is what Harari means by the system designed for total control, not a system that forbids specific thoughts or punishes specific behaviors, a system that makes specific thoughts unnecessary by providing such efficient substitutes for the thinking that would produce them. That makes genuine questioning of the system's values invisible as an option by providing such compelling within-system alternatives to genuine questioning. That makes genuine withdrawal from the performance invisible as a possibility by making the performance so thoroughly the medium within which social reality is constituted that withdrawal from the performance appears not as freedom but as disappearance. The people who wake up and disappear are the people in whom these mechanisms have failed to prevent the specific quality of perception that the mechanisms are designed to prevent. They are not smarter than the people who remain inside the performance. They are not morally superior to the people who remain inside the performance. They have not achieved some philosophical or spiritual accomplishment that places them above the ordinary level of human consciousness. They have simply, through whatever specific combination of circumstances and choices and encounters, developed sufficient distance from their identification with the performance to perceive clearly and irreversibly that the performance is a performance and that the life it has been substituting for is still there, waiting, on the other side of the willingness to stop performing. The silent disappearance is the process of crossing to that other side. And it is silent not because the people undergoing it have chosen silence as an aesthetic preference or a strategic withdrawal. It is silent because the system has no mechanism for making the crossing visible in terms that the people still inside the system can understand, because the crossing is towards something that the system's vocabulary and the system's values and the system's account of what matters and what is real are precisely calibrated to render invisible. The first layer of the silence is the silence of the reduced digital presence. The accounts that post less frequently, engage less reliably, become less predictably responsive to the social dynamics of the platforms that had organized their public existence. This silence is the most visible aspect of the withdrawal, and it is the aspect that generates the most interpretive activity from the people who remain inside the system and notice the absence of someone who was previously present. The interpretations that the system makes available for the absence are always interpretations that locate the explanation inside the person who has withdrawn rather than inside the system they have withdrawn from. Depression, burnout, conflict with other users, the decision to move to a different platform, the loss of relevance that the system imposes on those who cannot sustain the pace of continuous content production. These are the categories available within the system for understanding the withdrawal, and all of them share the characteristic of leaving the system itself unexamined and unquestioned as the context within which the withdrawal is occurring. The second layer of the silence is the silence of the reduced social performance more broadly. The declining frequency of attendance at the events and the gatherings and the professional and social occasions that the person's social identity, prior to the withdrawal, had made obligatory or at least strongly expected. The reduced availability for the continuous low-intensity social maintenance that digital connectivity has made the default mode of contemporary friendship. The changed quality of the social interactions that do continue, a quality that the people who experience it with the person undergoing the withdrawal often describe as the person seeming different, more present sometimes, more genuinely engaged in the specific conversation actually occurring rather than performing engagement while being elsewhere, but also harder to reach in the ways that the system had made reaching easy, less available for the forms of connection that the system's social architecture had normalized, and that the person's withdrawal is, implicitly and without necessarily intending it as a communication, declining. The third layer of the silence is the most important and the least visible from the outside. It is the silence of the withdrawal from the system's most fundamental demand. The demand for continuous identification with the story of who one is. The demand that one remain reliably, predictably, continuously the specific kind of person that the social identity one has been performing has defined. The demand for the consistency and the visibility and the legibility that the system's social architecture rewards, and that genuine interior movement, genuine change, genuine development of a different and more genuine relationship with one's own experience most consistently violates. This layer of the silence is the one that the people inside the system find most disturbing when they encounter it in someone they have known. The unsettling quality of the person who has stepped back from the identity they were performing, who is no longer reliably available to play the role that the relationship with them had been organized around, who is in some way that resists easy articulation, no longer quite the person they were, not in the ways that change through dramatic life events produces recognizable changes. In the quieter, more fundamental way of someone who has stopped performing a self and is in the process of discovering what they actually are beneath and beyond the performance. Harari identifies this layer of the silence as the most genuinely threatening to the system because it is the layer that represents the most genuinely irreversible form of the withdrawal. The person who reduces their posting frequency can resume posting. The person who withdraws from social events can return to them. But the person who has genuinely stepped back from their identification with the performed self, who has genuinely perceived the gap between the performance and the reality it has been substituting for, who has genuinely begun the slow and difficult and genuinely rewarding work of developing a more authentic relationship with their own actual experience, cannot unsee what they have seen, cannot re-identify with a performance that they now perceive clearly as a performance, cannot return to the unreflective, full-efficiency participation in the system that the system requires and that the perception, once achieved, makes permanently unavailable. This irreversibility is why the silent disappearance is silent in the deepest sense. Not because the people undergoing it are not speaking. Many of them are speaking more honestly, more directly, more genuinely than they did during the years of the performance. but they are speaking in ways that the system cannot adequately process or distribute because the system's architecture is calibrated for the specific forms of speech that the performance requires, and the speech that emerges from the genuine encounter with one's own experience, unmediated by the performance's requirements for what can be said and how and to whom and in what format for what kind of response, is not the kind of speech that goes viral, that generates high engagement metrics, that spreads efficiently through the networks of mutual performance that constitute the primary circulation system for ideas and perspectives within the system's architecture. The speech of genuine awakening is too slow for the system, too uncertain, too comfortable with not knowing and not concluding and not providing the satisfying resolution that the system's content formats reward. Too willing to remain in the genuine complexity of a question that does not reduce to a shareable insight or a provocative take or a clearly positioned opinion on an already established controversy. Too genuinely its own, emerging from the specific, irreducibly particular encounter of a specific consciousness with its own specific experience, rather than from the efficient processing of the system's informational inputs through the templates that the system's engagement metrics have established as the most effective formats for the kinds of content that the system most effectively distributes. This is why the insights of the people who have woken up tend to remain invisible to the people who have not. Not because the insights are not being communicated, but because the channels through which they are being communicated are the channels that the system has the least interest in amplifying, and the formats in which they are being communicated are the formats that the system's architecture is least calibrated to spread. The system amplifies what engages, and the most genuinely awakened speech, the speech that is genuinely its own rather than calibrated for engagement, that is genuinely uncertain rather than confidently positioned, that is genuinely exploratory rather than efficiently conclusory, tends to engage at the level of depth that the system's architecture consistently underserves and consistently, structurally undervalues. Harari's broader analysis of the information environment provides the framework for understanding why this is not accidental. The system's amplification mechanisms, its recommendation algorithms, and its engagement metrics, and its social dynamics of sharing and liking, and the various forms of mutual amplification that constitute the primary circulation of ideas within the system's architecture, are not neutral amplifiers that simply spread whatever is genuinely most valuable. They are calibrated amplifiers that spread whatever is most likely to generate the specific forms of engagement that the system's business model requires. And the speech that is most likely to generate those forms of engagement is the speech that is most emotionally triggering, most clearly positioned, most shareable in the sense of being reducible to a recognizable format that the recipient's social network will immediately understand the significance and the appropriate response to. The speech of genuine awakening fails most of these criteria and passes the ones that the system least rewards. It is not maximally emotionally triggering because it has replaced the reactive emotionality that unreflective participation in the system produces with the more complex emotional register of genuine encounter with genuine questions. It is not clearly positioned because it has replaced the performance of confident position-taking that the system rewards with the genuine uncertainty of a mind that has developed sufficient honesty about its own not knowing to resist the demand for false certainty. It is not shareable in the system's sense because it has replaced the efficiently distributable format of the hot take and the shareable insight and the clearly positioned opinion with the slower, denser, more demanding format of genuine thought that requires more from its audience than the system's architecture typically cultivates. And so it is silent, in the system's terms, present in the world, circulating in the forms and through the channels that genuine thought has always circulated in, conversation and sustained reading and the specific forms of community that depth rather than breadth requires, but invisible to the system's amplification mechanisms. Absent from the trending topics and the viral moments and the high engagement content cycles that constitute within the system's architecture the primary definition of what is real and what is happening and what matters. The silent disappearance of the people who have woken up is therefore not simply a social phenomenon to be observed and analyzed. It is a symptom of a deeper structural dynamic, the dynamic through which the system ensures its own continuity, by making the insights that would threaten its continuity inaudible within the channels through which the ideas and the perspectives that it amplifies most effectively are distributed. It is, in the most fundamental sense, the system's immune response to its most genuine threat. Not the threat of external attack, not the threat of regulatory intervention, not the threat of competing technologies, the threat of genuine awakening from within, the threat of the specific quality of perception that, once achieved, makes unreflective, continuous participation in the system permanently unavailable, and that, if sufficiently widely distributed, would make the system's continued operation at its current scale and its current level of extractive efficiency genuinely impossible. But here Harari's analysis takes its most important turn, because the silence is not permanent, and the disappearance is not the destination. The withdrawal that constitutes the silent disappearance is not, at its deepest level, a withdrawal from engagement with the world. It is a withdrawal from a specific form of engagement with the world, a form that the system has constructed and normalized in the direction of a genuinely different form of engagement, a form that operates through different channels at a different pace, with different values, and toward genuinely different ends. The people who have undergone the silent disappearance and have stayed with the silence long enough to develop the alternative relationship with their own experience that the silence makes possible are not, in the most important sense, absent. They are present in ways that the system's metrics cannot measure. They are contributing in forms that the system's architecture cannot amplify. They are engaged with the actual conditions of the actual world in ways that are genuinely different from and genuinely more appropriate to the actual requirements of the present moment than the forms of engagement that the system constructs and rewards. They are having different conversations. Not the conversations of the system, the rapid, multi-directional, always somewhat performative exchanges of people who are always partly aware of the audience for the performance of their intellectual and social engagement, but the slower, deeper, more genuinely exploratory conversations of people who are actually trying to understand something together rather than performing understanding for the people who might be watching. Conversations in which the genuine uncertainty is present rather than managed, in which the genuine difficulty of the questions is acknowledged rather than dissolved into the confident positions that the system rewards, in which the other person in the conversation is encountered as an actual person rather than as an audience for one's performance of intellectual and social engagement. They are doing different work, not the work of the system, the work of generating the content and the engagement and the continuous self-promotion that the system's economy requires of those who participate in it on the terms the system provides, but the slower, less visible, less immediately rewarded work of genuine contribution, of the development of genuine skill and genuine understanding and genuine capacity that takes longer than the system's attention span to develop and that produces outputs that the system's amplification mechanisms are not designed to spread. The work that does not generate high engagement metrics and therefore does not exist within the system's accounting as real work at all. But that is, in the accounting of the actual world rather than the system's model of it, among the most genuinely valuable work being done. They are living in different relationship to time, not in the system's time, the time of the continuous present tense of the news cycle and the trend cycle and the content cycle that constitutes the temporal experience of someone fully inside the system's rhythm, but in the longer time of genuine development, of projects that take years, of relationships that deepen slowly, of understandings that develop through the gradual accumulation of genuine experience, genuinely attended to, rather than through the rapid processing of large quantities of information that the system provides as a substitute for the slower development that genuine understanding requires. Harari's most important observation about the people who have undergone the silent disappearance is the observation that their apparent absence from the system's visibility is not an accurate representation of their actual presence in the world. The system's visibility metrics, the follower counts and the engagement rates and the trending indicators that constitute the primary accounting of who is real and who matters within the system's architecture are not measuring what is actually valuable. They are measuring what is most effective at generating the specific forms of engagement that the system's business model requires. And those are not the same things. The person with 100,000 followers who produces daily content calibrated for maximum engagement is, within the system's accounting, vastly more present and vastly more impactful than the person who has withdrawn from the system's demands and is conducting a sustained, genuine, deeply exploratory conversation with a dozen people who are actually changed by the encounter. But the system's accounting is not the only accounting. It is not even, in the most important sense, the most accurate accounting. The impact of genuine encounter, the impact of ideas and perspectives that genuinely challenge and genuinely change the people who genuinely engage with them, does not show up in engagement metrics. It shows up in the quality of the lives and the quality of the thinking and the quality of the choices of the people who were genuinely affected by the encounter, in ways that propagate through human networks that are not the networks the system tracks, and that produce effects that accumulate over timescales that the system's metrics do not measure. The silent disappearance is therefore not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a different story. A story that the system cannot tell, because the system's narrative forms are calibrated for the stories that the system produces and that the system's architecture is designed to amplify. But a story that is being lived by the people who have undergone the withdrawal and stayed with the silence long enough to discover what the silence is for in the actual fabric of their actual daily lives, in ways that are producing genuinely different and genuinely more valuable outcomes than the continuous performance that the system constructs as the alternative. The question that Harari's warning ultimately raises is not about the people who have already undergone the silent disappearance. They have, in their various ways and through their various processes, arrived at the perception that the withdrawal was the appropriate response to. The question is about the people who have not yet undergone it, the people who are still inside the performance, still identified with the curated self, still organizing their experience of their own lives primarily through the frame of the system's account of what a human life is for and what makes it valuable. The people for whom the perception that would make the withdrawal both possible and desirable has not yet arrived, or has arrived in incomplete forms that the system's mechanisms for managing the perception have successfully contained before it could develop into something sufficiently clear and sufficiently permanent to motivate the withdrawal. These people are not the problem. They are the system's most valuable asset. Their continuous, unreflective, fully committed participation in the performance is what makes the system function at the level of efficiency it is designed to function at. And the system has developed, through the accumulated experience of its own operation and the machine learning processes that continuously optimize it for the specific outcomes it is designed to produce, an extraordinary sophistication in the management of exactly the kind of emerging perception that, if allowed to develop fully, would motivate withdrawal. The sophistication of keeping the perception just sub-threshold, of providing just enough of the experience of self-awareness and self-reflection and critical distance from the performance that the perception of the performance's inadequacy can be experienced and processed and managed within the system's architecture without ever quite developing into the full clarity of genuine awakening that the withdrawal requires. This management is what the system's wellness content is for. Its mindfulness apps and its self-care discourse and its therapeutic language and its continuous invitation to reflect on one's experience in the specific platform-appropriate formats that the reflection generates content from. These elements of the system's architecture are not cynical deceptions, though their effects are cynical in their outcome. They are genuine responses to genuine human needs, responses that have been incorporated into the system's architecture in the form that serves the system's continued functioning rather than the form that would serve the genuine human needs they are responding to. They provide the experience of self-awareness without the substance of genuine self-knowledge. The feeling of stepping back from the performance without the actual stepping back. The sense of having engaged with the questions that the performance raises without the genuine engagement that would produce the perception the questions are pointing toward. The people who are navigating this sub-threshold awareness, who are feeling the pressure of the questions that the system's management mechanisms are containing below the threshold of full perception, are the people for whom Harari's warning is most directly relevant, not because they are failing, or because they are weak, or because they have made wrong choices, because the system they are inside has become, through its continuous optimization for exactly this kind of management, extraordinarily good at keeping the perception just out of reach, at providing substitutes for the awakening that are compelling enough to satisfy the felt need for it without producing the actual awakening that the genuine satisfaction of that need would require. What Harari's warning offers to these people is not a prescription, it is a description, a clear, honest, carefully observed description of what is actually happening, of what the system is and what it requires and what it does to the people who participate in it at full efficiency, of what the silent disappearance is and what motivates it and what it makes possible, of what genuine awakening consists of and what it costs and what it provides. Not as a recruitment pitch for the withdrawn, not as a celebration of the people who have undergone the disappearance, not as a condemnation of the people who have not, as a contribution to the specific quality of perception that, in whatever individual or whatever moment it develops sufficiently to generate its own response, generates exactly the response that the system is designed to prevent. The description itself is, in this sense, a form of the thing it is describing, a contribution to the conditions within which genuine perception can develop, not through the system's mechanisms of amplification and viral spread and high engagement content distribution. Through the slower, quieter, less efficiently tracked but no less real process through which genuine ideas, genuinely received, genuinely integrated into genuine experience, produce the genuine change in the quality of consciousness that all genuine awakening, in every tradition that has taken the possibility seriously, consists of. The people who have undergone the silent disappearance are not gone. They are elsewhere. They are in the conversations and the relationships and the practices and the forms of genuine engagement with the actual world that the system's architecture cannot adequately track or amplify or incorporate into the accounting that the system's metrics provide. They are doing the work that the system cannot do because the work requires exactly what the system most consistently prevents: the silence, the depth, the genuine not knowing, the genuine presence to actual experience, the genuine encounter with other people in the full reality of their actual inner lives, the genuine development of genuine understanding through the genuine accumulation of genuinely attended to experience. And they are, in this sense, not a warning about the future. They are a demonstration of it. A demonstration conducted in the specific medium of their actual lives, that genuine human life, organized around genuine values and genuine presence and genuine engagement with the actual requirements of actual existence, is still possible. That the system has not yet, and perhaps cannot, fully substitute the performance for the reality, that the reality remains available on the other side of the willingness to stop performing and the courage to remain in the silence that the stopping creates long enough for the genuine alternative to become visible. This is Harari's most important warning and his most important hope simultaneously. The warning that the system is specifically designed to prevent the perception that makes the genuine alternative visible. And the hope, grounded in the evidence of the people who have undergone the silent disappearance and found on the other side of it something genuine and something valuable and something that the system's most sophisticated management mechanisms have not succeeded in making permanently unavailable, that the perception remains possible, that the awakening remains possible, that the genuine human life, organized around the genuine requirements of genuine consciousness in genuine relationship with genuine reality, remains available on the other side of the performance that the system has constructed to substitute for it. That the silence, entered with sufficient willingness and remained in with sufficient patience, has something on the other side of it that is worth the disappearance it requires. And that the people who have disappeared, in the system's terms, into that silence are not lost. They are, in the only sense that ultimately matters, found.